So the first question is, would you say Brisbane's architecture is both functional and classy, and what makes you think that?
Do I think it's functional and classy? Well, my own opinion on Brisbane architecture is that it's the reflection of a new world, a new generation. If we compare Brisbane architecture with, say, a historic city from Europe, we're going to find a much different aesthetic and a much different layout to the city. I definitely think it's functional. I think function plays a huge role in how the architecture looks, and the integration with the river environment as well is definitely a critical factor to how the buildings are shaped and the way that they are used. And in this part of the city where we are now, it's very much cultural precinct, and on the other side of the river we have the contrast with the CBD, and so the functions of the buildings play different roles, and that's quite clearly seen when you're travelling up and down the river. You can see why the buildings look different and they are being used differently. Classy, there are some classy elements to Brisbane architecture. I think unique pieces that exist would be the cultural precinct. This is unlike any aesthetic that you would find around the rest of Brisbane City, and it's a really good example of modernist architecture, and I think modernism is quite classy.
Yeah, cool.
Do you think Brisbane's buildings are more modern than historical, or vice versa, and why?
Oh, they're definitely more modern. Yeah, there are good examples of more historical elements of architecture in Brisbane. However, Australia is such a young city, a young country, and Brisbane is a very young city compared with like the likes of Sydney or Melbourne.
Yeah.
And so the architecture here is what's been copied in other places. You can go to New Zealand and you can see the same styles throughout New Zealand from the early 19th century being used here in Brisbane as well. So this part of the world, we're very much sharing the same architectural styles.
Yeah. Would in a sense, would you prefer it to be more historical or modern? Because when we were doing the street interviews, they were saying they wished it was a bit more historical.
Ah, right. Well, I can understand that opinion of the public because we all think of more ancient places or more older countries in the world where architecture has been far more established and the decoration is more embellished because of the historical and political history of those countries, which shapes the architecture. Brisbane needs to celebrate that it's a young city and that we have a youthful aesthetic to our architecture. So I don't entirely agree with it should be more classical in its look. We're youthful and we're forward-thinking and we're progressive, and our buildings reflect that.
Yeah, cool, thank you. And all world-class cities have an architectural icon like the Empire State Building in New York City and the Eiffel Tower in Paris. Would you say Brisbane has an architectural icon?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, every city has its icon, whether it's small or big. I definitely think that our cultural precinct is an icon for Brisbane. An easy one to identify in Sydney is the Sydney Opera House.
Yeah.
And that was designed by a European architect. His name's Utzon. Whereas the Performing Arts Centre and our theatre building, our major theatre building, was designed by a prominent Queensland architect, Robert Gibson. And this is definitely iconic.
Yeah.
The Performing Arts Centre, and across Melbourne Street to the museum and art gallery, are buildings that the wider public identify as, oh, that's in Brisbane, you won't see it anywhere else. And I've talked to American visitors who have come to the precinct, and they love this building. They love the precinct. They think it's amazing, and it reminds them of home because there is a connection with America and the movement in America during the 1950s, 60s, and 70s of this style of very solid architecture being built, the monumental element to it.
So what would you say, like, if you had to choose one thing of Brisbane, because you gave the example of Sydney Opera House, that's like Sydney's thing, what would you say Brisbane's main building is?
Oh, the cultural precinct, the Queensland Performing Arts Centre.
Yeah.
I think so. That perhaps I'm being biased.
No, I think it is also
There's
right.
another interesting building that does capture the public's eye is the Gotham building across the river in the CBD.
Yeah.
When it used to dominate the skyline, it was renowned. People celebrated it. I think also too to lead on from your question, another leading piece of architecture is the classical aspects of the Treasury building. What used to be the Treasury is now the casino. That's a fantastic piece of historic architecture in Brisbane City.
Would you say Brisbane's buildings make it internationally recognised for tourists, and what makes you say that?
Well, maybe not to the same popularity as the Sydney Opera House, but
Yeah.
Again, being located on the river and being able to be seen from the other side of the river by whether you're travelling to Brisbane by car or you're a pedestrian. Again, the cultural precinct is a standalone edifice
Yeah.
that people recognise and see. And also too, it's a destination. People come here to see the arts. And I think that's very important to a civic building.
Yeah. How would you describe Brisbane's architecture?
We're a burgeoning city, and it's going to be high architecture in the future. As space runs out around the city basin, the buildings here are going to become taller and taller. So we can see the landscape of Brisbane becoming a city of heights, if you like, towers. And I'd call the aesthetic of Brisbane at the moment is somewhat adolescent. It's growing, and it's only going to grow taller.
Good way of describing it.
Do you think Brisbane's architecture blends into the natural environment, and is it appropriate in these surroundings?
So this question is regarding the environmental sensibilities of Brisbane's architecture and its integration with the natural environment.
Exactly.
Yeah, I think there are some very good examples done by architectural firms here in Brisbane. The use of natural timbers in large buildings, I think, is a fantastic way to get that connection with the environment, especially where you can experience timber and its natural qualities. So long as it's sustainable timber, we don't want to be milling natural native forests.
Yeah.
Those need to be protected. So an example of something that's been built recently are the new CityCat pontoons, and the old ones were destroyed during the 2011 floods, and so new ones have been built, and they have a defining aesthetic about them, where they're a continuation of this very linear square architecture that we see in the city, but these pieces are now floating on the river, and they look like their own little elements sitting there on the river, rather than it being something that's anchored to the bank.
And it's also an example of the functional and.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, they need to float.
So what sort of materials do the buildings use? Is it usually of the same type, or do they regularly use different and inventive materials?
And then also QPAC, like what was the main use of like the material, obviously the concrete, like what was the choice
So
behind
this question's about the QPAC building and its materials.
Yeah, and how it sort of blends into the use of other materials within Brisbane as well.
Oh, okay. Well, the architectural aesthetic that we experience from the QPAC building comes from a modernist movement that was at its height during the 1950s. And one could say that it comes from a brutalist doctrine of architecture, and that is where the natural raw aesthetic of the concrete is exposed. So when we look at the spaces, we can see that we can see all the aggregate and the stones that were used to actually make the structure of the concrete, and that's the expression of the raw material, which gives its aesthetic and works very well in natural light, because you get different shades of concrete. How that integrates with the environment, I think it sticks out and makes a contrast. If you're travelling up the river on the City Cat and you're looking at the QPAC building and the rest of the precinct, it chisels literally a defined line out of the blue sky that's set against it as the background. And I think that's very purposeful. That is man-made. That's a man-made element having an impact on nature. It's permanent. It's here to stay, and it's actually left an impact on nature that is, it's chiseled out of the sky. And it's important that a precinct this large that spans across 2 or 3 blocks of South Brisbane, the material links it all together, and so do the water features around the precinct, which creates a contrast between the solid concrete and the liquid, soft, and organic nature of the water, which is also a connection with the river. So there's all these, quite special elements going on to make sure that it's a cohesive story.
So it kind of like makes it stand out. Like it's very different to all the other buildings.
What
So
makes it stand out?
Like the material, I think, like
Yes.
really different to all the other buildings in Brisbane.
Yeah, it defines it. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Does the architecture appropriately convey the style and culture of the city? If not, what sort of image does it convey to the foreigners?
Well, I know that the foreign visitors we have notice the building.
Yeah.
They go, they're like, they know what it is because they've read about it, or they're coming to a show or an event here, or they're like, what's that building? Because it stands out from the rest of the CBD on the other side.
Yeah.
What was the last part of that question?
What sort of image does it convey to foreigners?
Well, I know for the Americans, they love it. Yeah, they absolutely embrace it. I've heard other comments that it looks like a big concrete block, and it's austere, and perhaps it's confusing for the visitor to know what the building does or what it's for. But mostly, it's a very positive reaction. Yeah, absolutely.
Notice quite around the building, I've seen lots of like greenery, like little like vines and
Yes.
like even
just
inside,
like a
and it
corner
looks
there.
really cool, like with the concrete, like really
Creates a nice contrast,
Yeah.
doesn't it? Again, it's the man-made versus the nature.
Yeah, and it brings in the natural surroundings as well.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So, would you think some of these buildings within Brisbane and also QPAC, would you think of art?
As art.
Yeah.
Absolutely. The essence of architecture is art.
Yeah, good point.
Is there any in particular you would say those ones are art?
Oh, right. In terms, perhaps they convey more sculpture and
Yeah, rather than abstract art, it's more so meaningful sculptural.
Now, other than the classical pieces of the architectural facades in certain parts of Brisbane, the ornamentation of those buildings, I think, definitely convey a period, an art, like an art popularity of the time.
Yeah.
Yeah. When buildings are designed, they are a reflection of where society's at. So if it is a glass facade, for example, and it reflects the environment around you, that's communicating where society's at that time.
Yeah.
And then this building can't think of any particular examples right now
Yeah,
that I think
that's
would be great pieces of art to be renowned. But perhaps I'm missing the point there, you know.
Oh, don't worry. That's fine.
I mean, I have a very good understanding of this building, so
Yeah.
I can identify why it was built this way and the influences that were used to create it. And I think the water features around the precinct are probably one of those good characteristics
Yeah.
regarding art.
And then also this building's very different to like other performing arts centres that you've seen. Like they're always very like old and like almost royal kind of looking, whereas this one's very modern and it's
Yes.
very different to others I've seen.
Absolutely, yeah. And so modernism is about expressing materials, but stripping back and taking
Yeah.
away ornamentation and being left with a plane, you know, a perfect symmetrical plane that you know, has its own beauty without trying to add decoration to it.
And cover it up.
Exactly, and we can see that in the interior here, whereby we have these expansive surfaces that are uniform,
Yeah.
but they capture the light.
I even noticed in where we went to see Bill Bailey, the roof was like so detailed and everything was just so like cool. It looks so different. I'd never been in there before, and it's just like even the wood like seats and everything. Was just,
Oh, and this was in the concert hall.
yeah.
Yeah, and the decoration plays a huge functional role in how the auditoriums in this building work. In the concert hall, for example, the timber lining of the if you like the box of the concert hall is specifically for acoustics, and when the sound travels through and around and bounces off these elements in the concert hall, it helps amplify and sharpen the sound, and that's very important for the orchestra, or an opera singer, or for a comedian who's presenting to a large auditorium that his voice carries beyond the first 5 or 6 rows of the auditorium. And the concert hall does that because of its interior design.
So, well, these questions you've also basically answered, but the last one, what do you think Brisbane could do to improve its architecture as a whole?
As a whole, Brisbane and the architects who design the buildings in the city need to keep being progressive. And they need to be integrating newest technologies as well as developing new technologies for building, especially as our environment changes. Old buildings struggle with heat waves because when they were built 30, 50 or 100 years ago, they were designed for the climate at the time. The climate's changing, so as architects develop some solutions to have buildings provide shelter and protection for humans, it's very important that our buildings will be able to adapt for the future rather than be fixed in a period of time.
To be ageless in a sense.
Ageless is good if you can achieve that. But adaptable, like humans are. I really think that architecture in Brisbane needs to be able to adapt with the climate and the way that humans use buildings. So that would be my advice for the architectural community. As well as don't be afraid to try new ideas. Never be afraid to ever try to design an icon.
That's a good quote. So, any more questions for anyone? Thank you so much for your time.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you for visiting the performance.